Hi, welcome back to Machynlleth 4mm. It's been a while since I've managed to get a video out. It's been a busy autumn for me. I haven't done a great deal on the layout that's been worth videoing. I have been doing quite a bit with rolling stock recently. A friend of mine is selling up his Great Western rolling stock collection. I've acquired quite a bit of that, and I've had a good time putting chips and getting it all running nice and smoothly on my track. As you can see in that intro, there's a couple of beautiful loco kits of a Barnum Goods and a very ancient 440, both a little bit early for my running layout, but they were just too good to resist, so there they are. I've got them now, and they're running nicely. So in this video I'm going to be addressing this lower yard area, and I think once that's done, the whole layout's going to really start looking like it's getting somewhere. So I'll just give you a little tour of what I'm planning to do in this video. So this is the lower yard area as it stands at the moment. There's no ballasting. I'm going to be doing ballasting in a similar way to that I've done in the rear yard, using fine sand and tile grout to create a sort of an ash cinders effect. I've made a few little buildings. This grounded coach body was made from a very ancient K's Kit passenger luggage van. This I acquired, this 6-ton crane I acquired quite a while ago from John Chivers Models. It's a very nice 3D print, very delicate. I need to get that painted up and put in place on a concrete base. I need to do all the ground cover along the loading bay platform, and this front edge, front face of the platform was the coal yard, so that needs some piles of coal all along it. From the photos that I've seen, there were no sort of proper coal scythes or anything like that. It was just heaped up in piles of various different size pieces of coal, so we'll need to do that. I'm going to put along the front here just the face of a platform that fits that faces into the layout. That's actually the slate wharf for the Corris Railway, which I've not got room to model in completeness because of the width of the layout. But I'm just going to put the edge of the platform there just to suggest that it's there, give a reason to have my slate wagons in the yard. And it also just give a little bit of protection for rolling stock not falling off the front of the layout, as that siding is quite close to the edge. Moving on down, these are what the Cambrian were using as buffer stops in the lower yard. They're old iron minks. They were filled with rocks apparently, with a set of buffers on the front. I need to extend the rails a little bit further and put that on there. Give me the opportunity just to show you how I've weathered my track. I need to do something with the weighbridge. I've made a couple of little huts here that are the coal offices, and then we need to blend all this area down here into the entrance to the yard and onto the main road. And I think I'm going to use this opportunity to repaint the main road, redo the tarmac using Gordon Gravit's technique of gloss paint and talcum powder. So that's what I'm hoping to cover in this video, so stay tuned. So this morning's job, and I didn't film it because it's a bit boring, was just to smooth this area out with some filler. This is a baseboard join where I can actually remove the whole of the other yard if I want to reach the back of the layout, because it's quite wide, and it was a bit the join here wasn't very smooth, so I filled that up, and I've also filled the little ridge where the cardboard from the loading platform area meets the baseboard. So we'll let that dry, give it a nice sand so it's smooth before the next layer. Next thing, I'm gonna deal with these two little pieces of track that will be underneath the iron mink buffer stops, and that'll show you just how I've weathered my track. So I cut a couple of pieces of flexi track and spray and paint those up and get them in place. So I've got a piece of the C&L flexi track that I've used for the rest of the layout here, just an off cut that's left over from that. I've marked out where I want to make the cuts with this rotary tool with a slitting disc. Be very careful with these. I've got a lovely scar here from where it all went wrong once, and make sure you're wearing some sort of protective glasses as well, because this will send little steel sparks off everywhere and you don't want those going in your eyes. So sorry about the noise. And just cut the webbing. And just trim that back. And there we have it. So I'll take these outside and give them a spray. My base coat spray is this Plasticoat matte dark brown colour. So here we are with our lengths of track with the dark brown sort of primer, and now I'm just going to add a little bit of texture and weathering. So with a nice wide brush, and we're back to our B&Q Sleepy Kitten. So we only want a tiny bit on the brush, really empty that brush, and then we'll just dry brush over the top of it. Over the sleepers, just to bring out some of the wood pattern and give it a little bit of age. And this is the technique that I've used to weather all the rest of the track on the layout. Hopefully you can see that looks a little bit like aged wood. And now with a fine brush, and this is Tamiya XF68, we'll add a little bit of rust effect. To the rail sides and the chairs. And to finish off, I've got some of these tiny little cosmetic fish plates that come part of the C&L chairs sprue when you construct your own points. Just to make sure that they line up with the rest of the track. on the layout. And I'll just give them a little coat of rust as well. Help them stay on as well. So hopefully you can see there, nicely weathered track, and that's how I've done all of the rest of the layout, but obviously with the track in situ rather than the luxury of doing it on sitting at a desk. Sorry about my phone. And I'm just going to use a bit of Evo stick, to put these in place. Wouldn't normally use this with full track laying. I use waterproof PVA, but I've actually run out of that at the moment. So, and then just line these tiny little fish plates up. Make sure everything's nice and straight. And when I've done the ballasting, I'll glue those in place. So I'm just sorting out a bit of a concrete surround to go with this, the steel plate of the weighbridge. This nice little etch comes from 7 models, and I want it sort of set into a concrete surround. So I've cut a piece of plastic card approximately the same width as the thickness as the plate, that will fit inside, and a slightly thicker piece of plastic card. I'm going to glue those onto the top like so. So just holding that in place, and then I'm just going to run some plastic weld, try not to get any fingerprints in it. Down the gaps, capillary action will suck that in and hold it in place nicely. And that's just to hold it up, because we'll be building up the ground cover around that. So we can paint that, and I'll show you how I'll do a concrete effect on the concrete base around that. So here's the base that surrounds the weighbridge plate. Primed that just with bog standard primer, and I've made, while I was at it, I've made a concrete hard standing base to go underneath the crane. So we're going to give it a coat of the Humbrol gloss number 40, beigey sort of colour first, and then apply this stuff, which is WWS Scenics concrete dust weathering powder. We'll just have a look at that. That's a nice fine powder. That's nice, comes out as a nice concretey colour. I'm going to spill some on there now. So going to give it a nice liberal coat of gloss. It seems a bit counterintuitive to paint this in gloss when we want a nice matte finish, but don't worry, the gloss won't show through. Gloss is just better for this because it doesn't dry so quickly. It gives you a longer working time and is a bit more sticky. So just make sure that we've got A nice covering all over. It hasn't built up too much in the corners. And then you leave it to go off a little bit. Don't put it on while it's still completely wet. Doing that will sort of even the effect of the brush strokes out. So now with an old nice soft brush, with weathering brushes, I'm just going to pick some of this up, put plenty on, and then just start pushing it around. Make sure I've got it all around the sides. Any bits where paint is showing through, let's give it another coat. I'm just going to leave that aside to set a bit. Rescue this bit. Do the same on here. So while the concrete's drying, I'm just going to paint this etch up. I'll start off with a layer of rubber black. Mainly get that into the sort of deeper areas of the etch. So with that dry, I'm now going to give it a fairly heavy dry brush of Tamiya XF64, one of my go-to rust colours. So you see it's starting to bring some of that detail out. A bit more rustiness around the edges and the areas where the vehicles won't have been driving. Bit more down the centre. And finally, I've got some Humbrol metal coat. Now it's gone a bit dry, but it's just about usable if I use a bit of thinners, because again I'm only going to dry brush this just over the top. There we are. Hopefully you're getting the effect there of it being a bit, the rust being worn away, leaving some gunge in the grooves between the treads and on the sort of the surface of the treads where you make contact with the wheels. The rust has been worn away. I think that looks quite good now. So here we are. I hope you can see that sort of effect. That's what I'm after. These are now touch dry. So that plate would sit in the centre there, flush with the concrete around it. So these concrete bases are dried overnight, a little bit darker than I perhaps wanted, so I'm going to weather them down with a bit of, this is Eastern European dust from Life Colour dust, and it's a weathering powder, so we'll see what that looks like. I'm going to put it on this bit first, yeah, because that's going to get buried, isn't it? Yeah, that's lightening that up quite nicely. What does that look like? Yeah. I think that probably looks a bit better. I might use one of the whiter ones as well. I'll just put some on here as well. There's the other two in the same pack. They're sort of greyer. Difficult to differentiate between the two of them. I think probably this one's a bit better. Got a nice concretey sort of colour there. That looks much better. So there's baseboard join here. There's a join between the cardboard and the plywood there with plaster over it. Over time you'll get different expansion rates, and if you don't reinforce this sort of joint you might end up with cracks going across your final surface, and I just want to reinforce the edges of this plaster, which is going to be, I'm going to make a cut through there. So just get some PVA on here, and I've just got some little squares of paper, and we'll just glue them over. This isn't going to be the final surface, by the way. There's going to be a layer of sort of DAS clay with a sort of nice sort of uneven surface that you'd expect to find in a yard on top of this. But I'm going to do the same to the other end of the platform up there. And hopefully you can see I've put the wharf in. It's just a thin strip of wood faced with the same Southeastern Farm cast stone effect, plasticard, and some edging slates, and along this very thin bit I'll put some slate, sort of slate effect ground cover, which I'll show you how to make. So the next little job is this little area here. Just need to build up a little bit of a wall similar to on that side, just using the Wills coarse stone sheets. So I want the wall to sort of bend round the corner up to sort of this sort of area here. But if you just cut it like that, the stones slope up the wall rather than being horizontal. So I'm just going to work out how high I want my wall. Not high, just a little low wall. And then mark up what the height of the deepest part of the recessed wall will be, and then transfer that measurement roughly to here, so that when I cut it, the wall will be sort of roughly that shape, and will fit flush with a small amount sticking above the ground up here. And then I'll need to do another piece of the wall facing this side, which is just much easier. That's just perpendicular. So I'll cut that first. So here's a neat little trick. I don't know if everybody knows this about the Wills embossed sheets, is you can bend them. So here we are. I've got a bowl full of recently boiled water. They've been sitting in there just for a few minutes. Use some forceps tweezers. You can bend it round the corner like that. Starting to take shape. Pop it back in. Heat it up again. Tend to have to over bend it. So there we are, and that will harden in that position, and we'll just get the inside of the wall and bend it to fit there. So there we are. We can now glue those two sections together and get them in place. So there we are, that's the front and the back halves glued together, cooled down, and they're holding their curve beautifully to go around there. We just need to put a little bit of sort of coping stones on the top. We'll get that glued in place. Oh, and a bit of paint. So here we are with our finished little retaining wall. Made a little thing of capping stones out of Das modelling clay, and it's been painted with a number of tester pots, emulsion tester pots, with a wash over the top to make the mortar lines come out nice and well. So we're just going to pop that in place now with an impact adhesive. There we go. I'm going to put a piece of paper over this joint here because the likelihood of getting a little bit of cracking there, so similar to this, I'll just put a little piece of paper over there, and then the next job is to create our final sort of surface with Das clay, where we can put tyre tracks and wear marks and things like that in it. So before I put the ground surface into the yard, I'm going to have another go at giving a decent coat to the tarmac road that goes up under the bridge into the main town. I've tried a number of different paint jobs and I've never been quite happy with it. I'm going to follow Gordon Gavitt advice with gloss paint with talcum powder over the surface. It gives a very fine matte result. I've already had a go at the top end of the road beyond the bridge. I'm quite happy with how that looks at the moment. I'll show you how I'm doing it on the closer area where it's a bit easier to see what I'm doing. So I've got a little pot here of Humbrol gloss number 40. Now it might seem a little bit counterproductive putting gloss on, but the talcum powder, once over the top of it, mats that down and the gloss stays stickier for longer. So just making sure I've got a good coating of the paint on the road surface, nice and even. It's also a good idea to give a good hoover before you start, because you don't want little bits of static grass and all the other dusty particles that end up all over your layout when you're doing scenery. You don't want that all mixed into your road, giving little lumps and bumps that wouldn't be there. So we've got a nice even coat there. I've got a tiny bit of flock in the middle of the road there. Get that up. Another bit here as well. Then we get our talc, give a liberal dashing of talc there, and then a nice soft dry brush, and just brush it gently over the paint. There, needs a bit of a hoover to get rid of the excess, but that to me looks like a nice smooth even road surface. So there we are. Hopefully you can see that as our base layer, and sort of a light dusty tarmacy sort of colour, lovely and matte, lovely and smooth. We can add with some weathering powders, sort of tyre tracks and things like that down the line. I just wanted to get this in so that I can blend this area into the tarmac, because I think there'll be sort of like gravel spraying out onto the tarmac entrance area there. Right, so you may have noticed I managed to balls up cutting through the plaster that I'd reinforced that joint with, and it all cracked away. So I've had to redo that with that rather orange DAS. That's the only DAS that I can get hold of at the moment. So you might be wondering why I'm going to all this effort of creating all these different layers. In this area here, there's a bit of buried track. I'll try and reproduce a picture of the original, sort of a buried point in the sort of the ground surface from one of the small tramways that used to run in the area. I'll try and pronounce it. I'm going to have to go from my crib sheet here. I think it's the Machynlleth Slate Company had a tramway here. So I've got a bit of spare track here, and I'm just going to sort of loosely represent the buried tracks here. So probably just want about that much, and a bit of a curve where it goes around the corner into there. and it's actually a point. So something like, I don't want to stand up, but something like that sort of buried in the track. So I'll even that out a little bit and get that glued into place. So those are nicely glued into place now. Just going to give them a coat of good old XF 68 rustiness. Don't need to be too careful because it's all going to get buried. When that's dry, I'll come back and start the DAS. Right, so I'm going to start putting this DAS ground surface down. I want to achieve an effect where some of the surface has been fairly compacted by vehicles moving around, and other areas towards the edges where there's a bit of loose sort of gravel material. And I've been sort of consternating about how to do that, and I think I've come up with a method. So I'm going to get the DAS down, and while it's still wet I'm going to work some sort of fine particles into the DAS in areas that I want it while the DAS is still wet. Then once that's dry, paint over it, and then add some sort of like particle sort of gravelly sort of stuff on over the top on the final layer. But I want that sort of compacted area to have some sort of texture rather than it being completely smooth. First thing I want to do is our weighbridge. I just want to get that into position. I don't want to glue it down yet. I'm just going to mark where it is so that I can put the clay over the top and then cut a section out that will fit that. And I don't want to put glue on that area, so we'll leave that there. So, I mean, you can just squash the DAS in with your fingers, but I've got this, so I think this might make my life a little bit easier. So rolling it out into sheets with a pasta roller. It's a nice and simple job, this. You just sort of squash it into a flat piece, pop it through your roller, and you're left with an area like that. And I think do with it a bit thinner than that, just the thickness. Pass it through again. There we are, that's maybe a couple of millimeters thick, and that'll do for the edges area around that bit of track work that's going to be buried. So the first step, I'm just going to put a thin layer of PVA over the area that I want the DAS to stick to. Excuse my phone again. You don't want a thick layer, or as it just slides around all over the place as you're trying to get it to stick down. But yeah, nice thin layer that's just damp. And we'll just pop that over there. cut away the areas that we don't need. We can put a little bit in there, can't we? Now press it in around that bit of point work, and then I'm just going to scrape off the surface to reveal our track work underneath. I'm going to push that in a bit harder actually, just so that the rails are a bit more raised. I think I've done this a little bit thicker than I probably liked. So the next lot I'm going to run through the pasta roller a second time and a thinner. And just with fingers, just start to squidge it into place how you'd like it. Make sure it goes right into the corner of that wall. Got a little spatula here, help getting it into the corners. I'm just going to wet my finger and just start getting rid of the fingerprints in here. Push that out a bit thinner, I think. And I'm just going to carry on like that really, and then before it gets a chance to dry too much I'll add some surface texture. Do this area down by the road. I want to blend it in to the road surface down there and the pavement here. Again, we'll go a nice bit of glue on there. So, crossing over the baseboard joint, and then I'm going to cut it where I don't want it to stick. Cut some bits around the edge there. So I'm just going to start. I think that needs a bit more glue around the edges actually. More glue. Just going to start with my finger blending it in. Again, I don't want to ruin that bit of pavement. So, You want to try and blend it so that there isn't a visible step where the clay starts and the road finishes. A bit better to do it with a wet finger than dry. The only trouble with that is you leave little orange stains all over. I much prefer to have done this with the white Das clay, but unfortunately, as I said, I don't seem to have any of that on the island at the moment. It's just the red stuff. So one of the reasons why I want to have this Das is so I can get some suggestion of depressions for tyre tracks and things like that in there. So I'm just going to start depressing the clay just with a finger, just to create some sort of deeper areas. That looks quite deep at the moment, doesn't it? But we'll blend that out. So we'll just start rubbing that in, rubbing those coarser edges down. If you think you've created too much of a lump somewhere, you can always take some out. If you take a bit out, just squish it into the next bit that you're working on. You could steal a bit out of there. So I've come to a bit now where there are some buildings going to be implanted into the surface and the weighbridge itself. So I marked that out earlier. So I don't really want glue on that surface. A nice clean cut around it. So I'm just putting glue around the area. Same with these little holes. These are where some little coal office sheds are going to go. Sure whether I probably won't get all of that in one go. cut around the edge of the Weybridge building. Now we just cut around here. Hopefully that bit is the bit that hasn't got any glue on it. And should just lift out nicely. There we are. So we can pop our little building in. And I can just use a spatula here. So I'm going to chamfer that off just with a wet trowel there, just because it's coming up over the level of the doorstep. There we are, so the doorstep fits nicely on there. And now just check that for size. That fits in there nicely. So just going to glue that in place now. So if we glue that in there, and then just gently, trying not to get too much of it on the actual piece itself, because I don't want it. We spent a lot of time trying to get that colour right, and I don't want to make it all red. So this area here, you might see these two depressions. They are for two little coal office sheds. So we can just use them for an impression. If I just push it into place, can then cut perfectly. Oops, he said I missed the spot. Peel that bit out. Glue overspill, making that difficult. And then we can just slot that in and just using the spatula to just make sure the edges of the building, of the clay, sorry, come up to the edge of the building. So it's starting to dry out a little bit now, so I want to get a little bit of texture on the surface before it does that. So I'm going for sort of a thicker, more coarse stones around the edges, and just reactivating the clay a bit by putting some water on with my finger like I was before. And I've got a rather a lot a spice jar here. With some fine sieved sand that I've got off the beach. So I'm just going for the areas towards the edges, just to fine dusting into the wet the wet clay. Hopefully as the clay dries it'll stick a little bit to that. I'll obviously be able to use a bit of scenic glue to keep it in place. And here I've got some much finer, no worries, that's going to come off, much finer sort of tile grout and sand mix. If I just pat that in. And come off later. Just going to blend it in with a brush. I'm going to hoover off the light, the finer stuff, and see what's left. Yep, so that was not a good idea. Let's try and repair that. It should be easy enough. Just glad it didn't happen down there. And just remember, this isn't the final finish. This is just getting a bit of texture into the clay. So I've gone all the way along this platform. Down here I've got the basin for the crane, and in this area here they stored and transferred timber, as in logs timber rather than sawn timber, and I imagine they'd use a traction engine or something like that to drag these logs around. So I've got my Oxford traction engine. I know it's a ploughing engine, it's not quite the right run, but I wanted to just use it to try and see if I can get some tyre tracks into the clay. I think that's working quite nicely. While this is drying, I need to get on with a few other jobs. So this line here is the coal wharf, basically, and all along here in the photographs that I've got of the yard in the era were just piles of coal in a line, and there were no sort of scythes to separate them. It's just piles of coal. The way I'm going to try and achieve that is by cutting out little mounds of insulation foam and then covering them in coal rather than trying to create the whole pile out of coal. To do that, you'd end up using a lot of PVA, which would just or scenic glue, which would just seep out into everything. So we'll start by cutting a few little mounds of coal. So I've got some insulation foam here and a hot wire cutter. So I'm just going to start off. I want my coal piles to be about, probably about this wide. Now I'm just going to start shaping this into mounds. Now I've got a rough shape of a series of mounds. I'll spend a little bit of time sort of smoothing them out. I'll sand them down. They'll be ready to have a coating of, first of all, black paint and then coal. So there we are, our little row of coal piles now. Just going to start smoothing it off with some sandpaper, fairly rough sandpaper this, 120 grit. Just take these rough edges off. So there we are, we'll get that painted and then we'll make some coal to put on it. So the best thing to represent coal is coal. There are lots of products on the market if you can't get hold of any, but I prefer coal. So I'm going to smash this lot up. Start off, I'm going to double bag this, it's a bit of a messy job. Inevitably holes in the bag in the process, so just an effort to try and prevent it from going everywhere. And if you can put a cloth over it as well, also sort of limits the amount of holes you're going to make in your bag. So coal hammer. Now getting that, I'm going to sieve out the small bits and carry on until we've got lots of tiny little pieces. Just going to sieve out what we've got in our bag here. Take all the smaller bits out, see how we're getting on. So we've got a good pile there. We can dump that into a container. And there, you can see that is looking like coal in 4mm scale. So we'll carry on bashing what's left of that. I mean, that's what's left of that, so there's plenty more to be made there. So there we are. After 5 passes, that's what we've got there. Reasonable quantity of coal. You can see that. You can grade that a bit more. I think I might put that through a finer sieve. And that's just the rubbish that's left over that really doesn't want to crush down anymore. So I'm going to grade it a bit further to larger lumps and then fine dust. So I've raided the kitchen again for a finer sieve. And if we just So now we've got 2 grades of coal. So we can use this one on coal piles and tender bunkers and things like that. We've got this much finer stuff that we can use as ground cover in areas where coal will be handled, either around the coal yard, in between the tracks and things like that. So there we go. 10 minutes work. We've got loads of very realistic coal, probably more realistic than a lot of the stuff that you can buy off the shelves. Now I'm just going to give the piles a coat of cheap black artist acrylic, so that when we glue the coal on, it doesn't, can't see the pinkiness of this showing through. So there we are. Almost looks like piles of coal already. Let that dry, and we can put some PVA and put a layer of coal on it. So battery went, I'm afraid, when I started this. We're just going to give this a liberal coating of PVA. Got it on a piece of baking parchment just so that it doesn't stick to what I put it down on it. And then I'm just going to put it over a piece of newspaper just so that I can salvage everything afterwards. I'm just going to sprinkle coal all over. So gently tip that. I don't want to lose all the coal in the pile. Newspaper stuck itself to the baking paper. And then with the finer coal, let's have a pile of that there. And just a gentle sprinkle over the rest of the piles to just fill the gaps. Right, I'll leave that to dry, and then we'll put a bit of scenic glue over it to hold it all in place. So I've just realised that I didn't actually do a shot of the finished coal pile. So here it is in place once the all the scenery's been done, and I hope you can appreciate that looks like a nice realistic coal pile now. So when I started this video, I hadn't realised just how much footage I was going to end up with. Far too much to just do in one video. So I'm going to leave it there for this video, and join me for the next one where I'll carry on finishing off all the ground cover, and I'll do a separate video on the grass that I'm doing with teddy bear fur. So thanks for watching this one. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and as I say, join me on the next video to see more of the lower yard getting built.